The first Red Cross nurses in America weren't shaped by peace. They were forged and behind the scenes, one woman built a system that could answer the next emergency, then vanished from the story at the moment it mattered most. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, American medicine was crossing a narrow bridge between old habits and new evidence. Germ theory was gaining ground, but in everyday life, especially in regions haunted by yellow fever, belief often traveled faster than proof. Fear didn't just come from the disease itself, it came from the confusion around it. What caused it, how it moved, and what was actually worth doing when danger felt unavoidable. In that environment, prevention could look like paranoia, a mosquito neti, a screened window. The insistence on routine cleanliness. These were not heroic gestures. They were quiet disciplines, easy to dismiss until the day they were all that stood between a household and catastrophe. Public health, as a modern idea, depended on people accepting that the smallest habits could determine the largest outcomes. And in communities where common knowledge was inherited, like a family heirloom, challenging it required a particular kind of resolve. Not loudness, but persistence. Nursing, too, was changing shape. It began to move away from being seen as simple bedside comfort, and towards something sharper, an organized profession that could control environments, reduce exposure, and prevent sickness from spreading. The nurse wasn't only present after the damage was done. Increasingly, the nurse was part of the strategy that tried to stop the damage from happening in the first place. That meant rules. It meant repetition. It meant doing the unimpressive tasks with relentless consistency. And this is where the first retention loop closes with a quiet force. History often celebrates the dramatic moment, the visible turning point. But the truth is that the dramatic moment usually belongs to whoever prepared for it. The same mindset that insists on a mosquito net when others roll their eyes, when it seems too small to matter, is the mindset that, years later, builds an entire national system of readiness. A system that won't rely on luck when the next emergency arrives. It will rely on discipline before the world even realizes it needs it. In the early 1900s, nursing in the United States was professionalizing fast, but not evenly. Training standards could change from one hospital to the next. The quality of supervision varied. Record keeping might be precise in one city and almost non-existent in another. In a camier, those differences could be hidden behind routine. But in a crisis war epidemic, mass casualty, those differences became dangerous. The American Red Cross already existed, and the idea of organized humanitarian response was not new. What was still unfinished was the infrastructure behind it. A clear system for identifying qualified nurses, verifying training, maintaining readiness, and mobilizing them quickly without administrative chaos. It wasn't enough to say a nation had nurses. A nation needed to know where they were, what they could do, and how fast they could be deployed when time. And you, don't let time be your enemy. Subscribe to the channel quickly and leave your like. Jane Delano emerged in that landscape as more than a capable nurse. She was an organizer with an instinct for what disasters reveal. She understood that emergencies do not create time for building systems. Emergencies only expose whether a system already exists. War doesn't wait for paperwork. Epidemics don't pause while committees debate. And when urgency spikes, lack of standardization turns into preventable loss. Her leadership style could look almost severe on paper. Criteria, credentialing, chain of command, training requirements, reports that had to be accurate and consistent. But the purpose of that severity was not bureaucracy for its own sake. It was continuity. A functioning ward at 2 a.m. A supply chain that doesn't fail when roads are jammed and schedules collapse. Staffing plans that keep patients from being abandoned when exhaustion turns even skilled hands unsteady. And this chapter plants a deeper question beneath the chronology. When a person becomes the engine of readiness, well, an entire national structure depends on their standards, their pace, their attention. What happens when the engine starts to overheat? The story is not only how she rose quickly, it's what that kind of responsibility demands, and how, later, the cost appears, not as drama, but as inevitability. Before the world's largest tests arrived, there was the quieter work of preparation. And preparation isn't inspiration. It's standardization. It's turning thousands of professionals, scattered across a vast country, into something coherent. A reserve that shares expectations, protocols, and a sense of what ready truly means. A reserve that can move not as individual heroes, but as a coordinated force. The Red Cross needed a system built for speed without sacrificing competence. That meant selection who was eligible, who was trained, who could handle the pressure without collapsing. It meant records that could be trusted. It meant training that assumed the worst conditions, not the best ones. Long shifts, uncertainty, shortages, contagious disease. and the emotional strain of caring for bodies that could not be saved. This was not preparation for a calm hospital with predictable routines. It was preparation for environments where routines would be attacked from every side. Delano's contribution, in essence, was to help make nursing deployable. Not in a purely military sense, but in an operational sense. The nurse became part of a larger machine, one that included logistics, supplies, sanitation practices, communication, and the ability to reinforce overwhelmed communities. In a nation still learning what modern public health required, this kind of organized reserve was a new instrument of survival. And yet, training on paper is one thing. Training under pressure is another. A reserve can look strong in a ledger and still fail in the field if it hasn't been built with realism. That is why the story doesn't linger on numbers as trophies. It frames them as a promise, being made one the world is about to demand payment. Here the second retention loop locks in. The viewer starts to realize this isn't simply a biography, it's the construction of a national machine of care. And machines are tested not in calm weather, but in storms. Even before war dominates headlines, another invisible enemy is already moving closer, faster than anyone can see. And when it arrives, it won't ask whether the system is complete. It will simply measure what exists. When the United States entered World War I, the mobilization looked the way history often frames it. Men, trains, ships, uniforms, and distant fronts. But running alongside that visible movement was another deployment, quieter, less photographed, and absolutely decisive. The deployment of nurses. Without them, armies can advance, but they cannot recover. There is no organized return from catastrophe, only a rising count of the lost. The number is striking not only because it is large, but because of what it represents operationally. Mobilizing 21,000 nurses is not simply calling for volunteers. It means building a system that can verify training, assign posts, coordinate transport, standardize practices, and keep communication intact across distance and chaos. It means ensuring that a nurse arriving at a base hospital can step into a ward that runs on shared expectations, sanitation routines, triage categories, documentation, and the discipline to function when fatigue makes mistakes more likely. In the background, the work was relentless and unglamorous. Rosters had to be accurate. Supplies had to match real conditions, not ideal ones. Assignments had to account for skills and resilience, not sentiment. A national nursing reserve is only as strong as its weakest link. And under war pressure, the weakest link is often not courage, it is organization. The difference between a well-run hospital unit and a collapsing one can be as small as whether orders are understood, whether infection control is enforced, whether shifts are covered when illness begins thinning the staff. For thousands of women, the decision to serve meant leaving the familiar and entering an emergency system that operated on a different scale of time. Days blurred. The work carried emotional weight that did not end when a shift ended, because the next wave of wounded arrived regardless of how exhausted the staff felt. War medicine demanded triage, surgery, infection control, and rehabilitation in environments where resources could be limited and the margin for error could vanish overnight. And in the shadow of every procedure was the same quiet truth. Survival often depended on the consistency of care after the battlefield, not only the courage on it. The public remembered battles, but hospitals had their own geography of crisis. Wards packed beyond design, the constant threat of infection, the grinding routine of cleaning, sterilizing, documenting, monitoring, and responding. In that ward, nursing was both science and endurance. It required skill, but it also required the ability to keep standards intact when fear and fatigue tried to strip them away. And the loop returns to the beginning. This force did not appear out of nowhere. It was built ahead of time, piece by piece, when almost no one was watching, through criteria, training, and systems that could move faster than chaos. That is why, at its peak, this story doesn't read like a simple triumph. It feels like a dangerous summit, because once you create a system that works under pressure, the next question becomes unavoidable. What happens to the people holding it up when the body can take any more? When urgency becomes routine and when the work begins to demand more than a human system can safely give? In the immediate post-war period, the world did not snap back to normal as if someone flipped a switch. Hospitals remained full. Infrastructure remained damaged or improvised. Disease did not retreat simply because a treaty was signed. Europe carried visible wounds, and invisible ones, public health problems, intensified by displacement, shortages, and exhausted medical systems that had been pushed past their limits for years. This was the environment Delano entered during her final inspections. An inspection in that era was not institutional tourism. It was judgment under pressure. It meant evaluating whether facilities were functioning, whether sanitation protocols were realistic, whether supplies were being used effectively, whether staffing was adequate, and whether the system could sustain itself without collapsing into preventable loss. Inspections were where optimism met reality, and where hard corrections had to be made not as criticism, but as a form of rescue. In a true documentary sense, this is where the story becomes most stark. The closer you look at the machinery of care, the less you see heroics, and the more you see the fragile requirements of survival. Clean water, sterile instruments, accurate records, clear lines of responsibility, transport that arrives on time, a schedule that prevents exhaustion from turning competence into error. These are the foundations, and they are also the first things to fail when conditions deteriorate. Delano's work here mattered precisely because it did not have the aesthetics of battle. It produced no dramatic victory shot. It produced continuity. It protected systems from the slow breakdown that often kills more quietly than gunfire, through infections, through miscommunication, through shortages that forced impossible choices. In post-war Europe, relief work required not only compassion but operational clarity. The willingness to see what wasn't working and to insist on change. And this part creates a suspense that feels almost inevitable. It is not suspense built on surprise. It is suspense built on limits. Because the more you understand what this kind of work demands, the more you sense that a price is being accumulated. Not metaphorically, physically, the body keeps accounts. Sleep loss cannot be replaced instantly. Stress cannot be erased by willpower. The mind can push forward, but biology does not negotiate. By 1919, Delano had spent years living at the speed of emergencies, organizing, standardizing, mobilizing, correcting. In Europe, close to accumulated exhaustion, and far from comfort, she kept working as if readiness could be held together by force of discipline alone. And that is the harsh reminder this chapter carries forward. Even the strongest leaders are made of the same material as the people they train to endure. Delano's death in 1919 marked a symbolic closing of one era and the opening of another. The early 1920s are often remembered as a cultural shift, new energy, new pace, a country trying to move forward. But beneath that surface, the nation carried an inheritance from the previous years. An emergency nursing system, tested in conditions that left little room for illusion. When a central figure dies at the height of a mission, what remains isn't only grief. It is structure. It is method. It is institutional memory. The system she helped build did not depend on a single moment of inspiration. It depended on standards that could outlast any one person. That is why her loss, while severe, did not erase the work. It pressed the work into permanence. Her burial at Arlington places the story inside a national frame. It ties nothing often treated as supportive or secondary to the same landscape of sacrifice that the country reserves for its most solemn remembrance. It is a recognition that the work of care in crisis is not a footnote to history. It is one of the forces that decides whether a nation can survive its own emergencies with integrity. And that is why this story belongs to 1922. Because what Delano helped organize continued to shape what came next. Broader civilian preparedness, stronger community training, and crisis response that could reach beyond major cities into smaller towns and rural areas. The Red Cross moved into a phase where nursing was not only reaction, it became continuity and network that could be reinforced, expanded, and adapted as the country faced floods, outbreaks, accidents, and the ordinary emergencies that never make national headlines until they overwhelm someone's local world. The final emotional turn is quiet but durable. What begins as an individual story ends as a national story. The loss did not stop the system. It sealed the legacy, and that legacy spread through communities as an idea Americans rarely celebrate when it works. Readiness, a concept often remembered only when it fails, but when it holds, it saves lives in silence. If you want to keep exploring what life really felt like 100 years ago, I'll leave a link in the first comment to an incredible ebook you can download. And when this video ends, click the next one that appears on screen. Ed continues right from here, with another true story from 100 years ago. The fear of polio in 1922. When schools shut down and entire cities isolated to stop an invisible threat. Like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, which part of this journey do you think the world should remember most?